Hello, Reliable Web Summit. I'm excited to talk to you today. I'm here to talk to you about something that I find very interesting, which is the lies that we tell ourselves about how we do testing. And I think it's important to understand why that matters when we're talking about how to make a more reliable web. Because if we don't understand that, how are we going to make sure that we're getting it right? It's all part of what's connected together. So let's get going. It's really important to this whole talk that you understand I do not think that deployment is the same as release. Deployment is the act of getting your software to its destination. That might be deploying it to server, it might be pushing it to a mobile device. Whatever it is, it's the act of getting software where it needs to go. Release, on the other hand, is a business decision about who gets to use what you've gotten to the place. Release is about experience, where deployment is about action. And those two things are very different if we really think about how it happens. And it's a thing that is easy for us to forget because for a long time they were the same thing. If you made edits to a web page and saved them and FTP'd them, release and deployment were the same. The minute the file had changed on the server, it was changed. But that's not how we're operating anymore. Instead, what's happening is we are all testing in production. We are all making changes that make it to production and may cause problems in production. And some of us are willing to admit it, and some of us aren't. But there is no way you can get away without having some failures on production. You can't have 100% uptime. It's a logical impossibility. So what we're aiming for is that any problems that we have on production are meaningful in that we can tell what happened and fix it so it doesn't happen again, and not catastrophic. We want to not destroy our company if our website goes down for a while, if we have some kind of software problem. So those are the things that we care about as grounding for this talk. And I want you to understand those because I think it's really important that you understand production is never perfect. So how many of you know this story? We deployed to staging and thought everything was going fine, but when we deployed to production, things went wrong. And it turns out that there were dependencies we didn't know we needed, or it was internal tool and we didn't have everything hooked up the way that we would in production, or we had some mock APIs or endpoints in and it's behaving badly now that it's in production. We could all sit around and tell these stories because I think it happens to pretty much everyone that the thing they believed was going to work properly didn't work properly. That's because staging is a lie. It's a lie that we tell to comfort ourselves, but especially in a cloud-native world, it's a dirty lie. We have enormous difficulty handling the complexity of any kind of cloud-native application. When you think about it, probably 2/3 of your product is actually written by somebody else. There are libraries and tools and all sorts of things that you're incorporating into your code to make it serve your business use, right? So when we think about staging, how are we going to make it accurate? How are we going to say, oh yeah, it has all of the same resources and it can auto-scale the same way and it has all of the same API endpoints? Are you going to license extra API endpoints just to do your staging testing? Most people don't. Are you going to figure out what kind of data that you're going to get and replicate that? It's pretty hard. So when you think about staging, it's a useful step, but it's not actually a reflection of how anything's going to happen in deployment. I could have found this screen anywhere. It says, this code worked in production, or it says, this code worked in staging, but it doesn't work in production, and I don't understand why. And I think we've all had that moment of like, I don't understand why you're not working. Everything says that you should be working, but you're not working. Why are you not working? And that moment of disconnect between what staging told us and what's happening on production is where we see the lie of staging. Lots of us, especially in enterprise, think that we'll be able to use blue-green systems to do transitions and staging. We're going to stand up another environment and it's going to have all the same resources, and we're going to make updates on it and then transfer our stuff over, and it doesn't work. Because it's really expensive to create an entire second environment with all of the licenses and resources and scaling and everything. It's really hard to do. And there's a lot of complexity, and it's really easy to forget something that's essential, but you didn't have documented properly. There are a lot of unstated assumptions that exist to make production work because we need it to work. And when we're building something else, there's not that same urgent feeling of getting it exactly right now. So staging and green are expensive options to try and duplicate production, and they're not very good duplicates. I've already told you some of the reasons it's difficult or impossible to replicate production, but there's also an interesting lack around testing. We can't fully test software behavior in staging because we don't have the user data. And how are you going to keep the user data safe? And if you don't use real data, how are you going to be sure that you catch things like names that you didn't expect? I have been saying for years that we need to be looking to the future in our inputs and make sure that we are not just sanitizing them, but accepting as many inputs as possible. And last year, we got a bug in from somebody who said, I want to delete this feature flag, but I can't figure out how to do it because it's named with an emoji. And we're like, yeah, no, we didn't test that because it didn't occur to us anybody was going to name a feature flag with an emoji. But it should be possible. You can name it with an emoji, and an emoji is a valid Unicode character, so why not, right? You're not going to be able to predict the true weirdness of what's going on in production and in user data without actually seeing user data. This picture is of an organ that we didn't know we had 10 years ago. All of us have one. It's called the interstitium. And it is a series of tubes that run through our body that carry a clear fluid. And we didn't know we had it because the only way we had to look at our bodies for a very long time was to cut them open. And what happens when you cut open a pressurized tube? It collapses, and it just looks like a string. And so we didn't realize that these were actually vessels, and we just assumed that they were like gooey stuff that kept us together until we had imaging good enough to see it. It didn't occur to us that this would even be a thing. And so we didn't test it, and we didn't look to see whether people had good interstitium pressure or whatever. My point is, this was an unknown unknown. We didn't know we had it. And when we're setting up testing, we can really only check for known unknowns. Unknown unknowns are the emergent behavior of a system and its users and its inputs all at once. So now that I've depressed you about the complete impossibility of replicating production in any kind of reasonable way, let's talk about what we can do. Production can contain superposition. When I say that we should stop using staging, I don't mean that we should stop doing staging. Staging is essential to understanding how anything's going to work. The concept of staging is vital to our understanding of how the software is going to behave in the system that we're wholly in control of. But once we get out into the world where we are not fully in control of the system, we need to up-level our testing for that. The cool thing is you can have deployment that contains a subset that is staging. where you're trying out new features, but you're not releasing them, business case again, you're not showing them to everybody. You don't have to have a specific staging server to make this happen. You just have to have the ability to direct features to some users and not other users. Maybe you only want to direct new features to your QA team. That seems reasonable. It can still be on production. It can still be existing in the full weirdness of a production server, but it's not going to get shown to users. You can use feature flags and targeting in your production environment to deploy without showing your work in progress to everyone. In fact, to be doing continuous integration and continuous delivery, you have to be deploying broken code all the time. If you can't put broken code into production, then it's not continuous. I'm not saying you should do it. You should definitely run your integration test and your unit test and make sure that you're not committing broken code all the time. But when you think about it, the rule about not committing breaking changes assumes that everything is going to be running. And I want us to break that assumption. I want us to say, there's a lot of code that exists that may not be running. There's a lot of our DNA that we're not using. It's just hanging out, coding for things that we don't need anymore. And that's okay. We still function. Your code base, I don't want it to be a hot mess, but your code base can have some things that are not functioning yet that are coming soon. If there isn't a way to deploy non-working code into production, you're missing the point of continuous integration and continuous deployment, and you're just doing some kind of very rapid feature branching. You can hide in the dark. These are dark matter hairs around Jupiter. A lot of our universe exists, and we don't have a way to see it. And your code and your users can be the same way. It can exist without being visible. It still matters. It's still testable. It's still usable. It's still running metrics and returning analytics and observable. It's just not hitting user experience. The idea of dark launching has been around for a long time. Sometimes what we mean when we say that is trying it out with a select audience, and sometimes it means splitting requests and sending them against a new service, and sometimes it means opening, but with no fanfare. Restaurants call this a soft open because it's remarkably difficult to get everything right the first time. How do you do tickets and who gets the smoke break and everything like that? So instead of having a big opening, they'll have a soft open where people just sort of wander in and get some food at nowhere near peak capacity. The same thing works with software. It's far easier and cheaper to fix something if only a few people have seen it. You don't need to apologize for a worldwide outage if only your QA team was affected, or if only internal users were affected. You still haven't had the problem publicly. It's just been a small internal blip, and you can roll forward, turn the flag off, and keep going until you figure out what caused the problem. It's going to be much safer to do that than it is to be doing any kind of big deployment. When I think about this problem, I think about something that happened to the Best Buy website a few years ago on Black Friday. Now, Best Buy has an interesting quirk in that they feel like it's maybe bad business to be paying their competitors. So they aren't hosted on AWS. They can't scale. They have what we used to call data centers. And they have what they have. Well, they had a problem on Black Friday, and their website went down. Now, they knew roughly how much traffic they were going to get, and they had provisioned adequately to handle that much traffic. The thing they didn't provision against was if the website goes down, everybody tries to fetch it again, all at the same time. And that initial payload is so much larger than the maintenance payload that there was no way they could support that. So every time they stood the website back up, it would fall over under load again immediately because they didn't have a way to moderate that. It took hours on Black Friday to fix their website. And what they ended up doing eventually was traffic shaping so that they only let a few % through at a time and then got the page fully loaded and then let a few percent more through and got the page fully loaded, so that they didn't have this thundering herd problem while everyone was trying to load the very heavy page all at once. I think this is a great example of why sometimes you need to be able to change how people are experiencing your website. Another thing that they could have done if they'd had the tools in place is degrade the experience. Maybe you don't need all of the shiny, flashy things on a website. Maybe you can turn off the "how do you feel about this" sidebar, or the pop-up banners, or everything but the shopping cart. And if you reduce the weight, you can stand up a lot faster without having to do any recoding. You just turn off the features that are heaviest and go on with your life. Because the important thing about a website is not that people see everything. It's that they leave with the thing they came for. Nobody really says to themselves, "I want to read a website." They want to know a thing, or they want to buy a thing, or they want to navigate to a place. This is what they're here to do. And so everything that gets in the way of that is the problem. When we think about integration testing, we think about automated tests and testing plans and sometimes stress tests. What we haven't talked about much yet is how difficult integration testing is in a full microservice world, because every time we add a microservice or a feature flag, we are combinatorically increasing the complexity of doing a kind of full end-to-end test or a full test coverage. We can still be doing end-to-end tests. This is the cool thing. As soon as we get over testing what we have and start testing the experience, it opens up a whole new realm, because there can be black boxes as long as they are giving me expected inputs and outputs. If there are tiny gnomes chiseling ones and zeros inside this box, and they are predictable ones and zeros, I don't care. We need to move toward doing this more dynamic understanding of what we're trying to get our sites and our features to do. Behavior-driven testing is the way to understand how to manage the complexity of both microservice testing and feature flag testing. Is it doing what you expect? Is it breaking anything? And is it getting people what they need? When I think about how to do integration testing and how to make sure everything works together, I think about the Opportunity rover. Opportunity was designed for an operational lifespan of 90 days because Mars is kind of hard on equipment. The winters are very, very cold and very dark, and there's a lot of dust, and it's kind of corrosive, and it's terrible. Opportunity functioned for 15 years, sending us information back. And when somebody asked JPL why it had worked so well, the answer was that they had understood they needed to make this loosely coupled. So even if the rock driller was not working, they still had the ability to do like spectrographic analysis of other things. Every part was made to talk to each other, but none of the parts were dependent on the function of others. Even if we lost the radio and the backup radio, we'd still be doing science for as long as the batteries stayed on and the solar cells were powered, because we might go back and pick that rover up someday. We don't know. And then we'd have science from them. So when I'm thinking about how we design our systems, I really think Mars rovers are aspirational and inspirational because they are so functional while being loosely coupled. They're all together on a platform. They're all working together, but they're not necessarily depending on each other. And I want more of that. So I know that you have a lot of arguments in your heart that you want to have with me because you think I'm wrong. That seems fine. But you can't just wholesale dispose of staging. That's what you want to say, right? But it's true. I agree. Like we've discussed, you do need somewhere to make sure that your stuff is going to work in production. But stop thinking of it as a separate unit, as a different server. You're not using servers anyway, so why not put it all in one environment and then just gate who gets to see what? that gives you a lot more capacity to know that what you're doing is actually doing what you want it to do. So let's address some of the objections that I can see brewing in your souls. Testing. You would like to tell me that none of this testing is sufficient. You need automated testing as part of your code hygiene and practices, and that doesn't ever stop being true. I think it's easy for us to believe that there are a lot of things that would be easier if we moved on to do something new, but the truth is we need to be adding to a firm foundation, because new technology is not going to save us from bad fundamentals. This is a picture I took at Masada. This is a picture I took at Masada. What I'm looking at here is the foundation of a Roman fort that's over 2,000 years old. If you wanted to show up and build a Roman fort again here, it would go great because that foundation still exists. You know that this firm foundation, that this integration and unit testing and automated testing is super important. But is your team behaving like incentivizing and rewarding it? Because if you're not, then none of what I'm saying here is going to make a difference to your uptime or reliability. Without that firm foundation, you're not going to get very far. So next, what about unit testing? What about unit testing? You're going to do it at the same time you always do, right before you commit it to trunk. Oh, if you don't have testing to commit things, stop, because again, you don't have a firm foundation to go forward with these new ways of doing things. Rethink how you're doing things and make sure that you have unit testing so you make sure that you're getting things right the first time. You need to know that what you're putting in is either invisible or non-breaking, and hopefully both. And that's what unit testing exists for. What about bad ideas? Sometimes people have bad ideas, and isn't the point of staging to keep those from happening? Yeah. Without staging, you might take production down by accident. I want to tell you that if your staging environment or your production environment is not strong enough to withstand some wobbles, maybe the best investment for your time is to go make it stronger, to beef that up, to make it more robust, to make it more resistant to damage. If you could take down production by entering a wrong command, you need some more safety rails. And that's not about how you do staging, that's about how you manage production. Because nothing in staging is going to stop you from entering that one wrong command on production. So when we think about bad ideas, we need to be thinking about safety railings and things that can go wrong. Also, you may not know something is a bad idea just because of staging. You may just have false confidence. Sometimes there are things that you can only test all in one piece. This is the Antares orbiter blowing up, because even though every part was methodically tested, in combination, there was a problem. And we're only going to find that out when we try and launch something into orbit. All right, you say, what about essential cutovers? Like that moment when you switch from one system to another and you can't have both of them running at the same time. Why can't you have both of them running at the same time? Why can't you split your traffic to be writing to two places at once and checking to make sure that everything is going fine before you turn one down? And I love the idea of turning down an old database or part of a monolith. I don't want to turn it off abruptly because that throws all the traffic into one place, and it's that abruptness can itself cause problems. Instead, you flag that part that you're going to turn down and you gradually reduce its response. Maybe it's not responding to everything. Maybe it's responding to 90%, to 80%. As you turn that down and the load on your new thing comes up, you have a chance to rebalance those and say, oh wait, the new thing, it has a memory leak if we get over 60%. Okay, leave the old thing running. We're going to go fix the new thing before we cut over. That's the kind of thing you're never going to find out with an abrupt cutover. So here's what I want to tell you to do. Here is my charge to you. Launch darkly. Instead of using staging, launch new features in production and keep them concealed. Keep your environment consistent and well-tuned so that you know exactly what's happening in one place, so that you can reduce overhead and increase your confidence. Branch by abstraction. Branching is an artifact of how we think about adding new behavior or features to our code. It's not really an essential part of how we do code storage. It's a pattern created by our source control systems. And it's a useful mental model, but we don't have to have actual branches all the time. We could branch by abstraction. We could think, this is a thing that I am thinking of as separate, even though it is in the main code base. Test in production, because you're always testing in production anyway, and once you admit it, you get much better at predicting what's going to go well and poorly. So if this talk went on too long and you read Twitter or your email, because it's sitting right there in front of you, if this talk was too long, remember this: kill staging, because it is a plausible lie. Test in production, because it's the only way you're going to know how things behave in production. And if you'd like more information or a free t-shirt, feel free to visit this URL and we will send you something. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a great conference. Bye.
Hey, it's Joe Eames with ng-conf. If you like that video, be sure to click subscribe either here or here, somewhere over here. And if you're looking for something more, here's another video for you to watch here or there or somewhere.